Start now.
Welcome to the League of Women Voters Minneapolis Public Education Forum, which we call Civic Buzz. The League is a nonpartisan, nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in all levels of government. We work to increase understanding of major policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Our goal for the Civic Buzz is that everyone leaves the discussion with a broader understanding of the issues. We'll begin with a short presentation from our speaker, followed by time to address questions from the audience. You can put your questions in the chat and we will pose them for you, or you can use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen and we can call on you to answer or to ask your question yourself. Our speaker today is our city clerk, Casey Carl. And I've lost his bio, but he's been our city clerk for, I believe, since 2010 now. And we are lucky to have him talk to us about government structure and what's been going on with that since the passage of the Executive Mayor Legislative Council ordinance over 2 years ago now, and how that's been implemented and how it's having an effect on the way our government is working. We also have former city council member Lisa Goodman, who was instrumental in passage of that ordinance and who worked for 2 years to help implement it. And she'll be here to answer questions from that perspective after the presentation. So with that, thank you very much for attending and take it away, Mr. Carl.
Thank you for having me. The League of Women Voters is a great partner to the city of Minneapolis as a corporate enterprise, and certainly is a big booster and gift to the city itself. And I appreciate all of your support in your various capacities. I'm going to try and share my screen. I think I preface this that I don't use Zoom very often, so I'm going to see how good I can do. And you'll all have to forgive me if I'm not doing a really great job at it, but hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, you can.
And I'm going to then try and do a screen show. And I'm sure, this being the league, I'm not going to tell you anything new that you don't know, but we'll go through it together. And I'm happy to address questions either as we go or certainly at the end and share with you what I know of the implementation of this new form of government that, as you alluded to, was adopted by voters in 2021. So without further ado, the Executive Mayor Legislative Council form of government here in the city of Minneapolis, of course, was a ballot question initiated by our Charter Commission. It amended our city charter. The city charter being like the city's constitution, it fulfills many important functions, obviously. But among the most important of those are the three that I've listed on this slide. It defines the city as a municipal corporation and defines its powers and authority subject to state law. It also prescribes the city's operating structure. We sometimes call this form of government, system of governance, operating structure, all the same thing for my purposes, and its principal officers. And then, of course, it specifies those processes by which this thing called the municipal corporation, the city of Minneapolis, takes official actions and how those actions then are implemented and enforced. Minnesota was the 4th state in the United States to permit home rule authority for its local government. So it's been one of the first to allow that recognition of local home rule authority. And despite the fact that that happened very, very long ago, the city of Minneapolis, even though from very early on was the largest city, the voters in Minneapolis were not enthusiastic about the idea of local control for their own city. And so the state acted as a parent body for much of the city's early years. It wasn't until 1920 that our first home rule charter was adopted, same year that the federal constitution was amended to give the franchise to women. So a big year, both for the nation and for the city of Minneapolis. But that first charter was not really well done in the sense of usually there's a model city charter and there's a lot of deliberation into how that's done. Instead, in Minneapolis, the state legislature sort of fed up with this largest child said, here are all of the laws that affect you as a first-class city. Here are all the special laws we've adopted for you. They put it together and said, there's your charter. And so from the beginning, it was a very unorthodox way for the city to get a charter. And even through to today, as we sit here in 2024, there are remnants of that strange and unusual or unorthodox, I guess. I've lived in Minnesota for 14 years, so I should say that interesting way for us to get a charter still has an impact on us. But this is what we're talking about when we changed our form of government, because it is defined by our Constitution. And from the beginning, what it prescribed, I shouldn't say from the beginning, very, very early on, there were multitudes of elected officials. We had an elected comptroller who was the principal accountant, if you will, of the city, an elected treasurer. We had an elected mayor. We had a number of aldermen who composed the city council, and that number changed over the years, as you all know, starting with one from each of a few wards to four, from 4 wards up to, at one point, we had 13 wards and 2 council members or aldermen from each of those wards. It wasn't until the 60s, I believe, when we got to the 1 council member from each of 13 wards, and it stayed there. Originally, we had a number of boards and commissions that were appointed by the mayor, the council, the state legislature, and a number of other sources. And those boards actually supervised departments. So as an example, our health department and the commissioner of health, that actually started out being under the authority of the Board of Welfare that was appointed by various sources, right? And then the health commissioner was actually appointed by that board. And so there was this very hodgepodge sense of government. It reflected sort of the New England style of government. I'll use that term broadly, where the citizens really believed that the more cooks in the kitchen, the more fingers in the pie, the better off we were. And so authority was very, very diffused across elected officials and these appointed and elected boards and policymaking officials, and then a handful of staff that over the years became known informally as the charter departments. And that phrase, charter departments, plays an effect on us even to this day. And those are the ones on this slide that you can see in that dotted line there in the middle. Those 10 departments over the years became what were referred to internally as charter departments. They're the ones that were appointed jointly by the mayor and the council. But the truth is, people may not recognize this. The mayor and the council together made the appointments, but there was this interesting sort of middle ground that the former mayor, Don Frazier, sort of created. When he became mayor, he was very frustrated at the fact that he didn't have the powers of a strong mayor and had to do a lot of bargaining and a lot of compromise with the council. And he pushed for a strong mayor amendment when he was mayor. That was probably the 7th time in the city's history that there was a push for a change in government to, prescribe for a stronger executive, central executive, and it didn't go. So as a compromise, he said, well, how about if we have a committee? The city of Minneapolis has long been structured around committees. What if we have a committee? But this one's going to be a new one. I'll be the chair of it as mayor, and a couple of the council members will be on it too. And that committee will be the executive committee. And that's what the voters adopted. And so they created this thing in 1984. So it's a relatively recent invention in the city's history. And the compromise that Mayor Frazier brilliantly put forward said that this executive committee chaired by the mayor would be the appointing authority of those 10 charter department heads. And they couldn't be appointed by or removed from those offices except with the vote of that executive committee. And what that did, albeit indirectly, is it gave the mayor, starting with Mayor Frazier and since, all the hallmarks of a traditional strong mayor. Maybe only in concept, if not directly in name. But traditionally, a strong mayor has at least 3 powers that define a strong mayor. Number 1, they have the authority to veto or approve legislative acts of the legislative body. And our mayor has that. And it had that at the time. Number 2, they get to formulate the budget and propose spending plans. And our mayor had that. What the mayor didn't have was direct authority to appoint department heads. And Mayor Frazier couldn't get that far, but what he got was this. And I think his thinking probably, I wasn't there at the time, was if I can chair the committee, have a vote on the committee, and I'm the only one who gets to nominate, right? The executive committee has to react to my nominations. Then I've controlled as much of that process as I possibly can. And that got the mayor, starting with Mayor Fraser up until this amendment passed, as close to a traditional executive or strong mayor as possible. But technically, legally, the authority to hire and fire these 10 departments in the dotted line vested in that executive committee. And they could only act on nominations put forward by the mayor. So it wasn't necessarily as strong as you thought. And what the system of government we really had in place then was a mayor who wasn't really the chief executive, a council who had a lot of authority, but actually didn't have direct authority over department heads. And then you had these 10 department heads in the middle. And once they got appointed, they kind of were isolated. They were their own boss. And they kind of had to do a little bit of what the mayor and council said, but only the executive committee could appoint or remove them. And then the coordinator, interesting role, sort of like a city manager. That person, once appointed, they supervise the other 10 departments that you see down below, what we call the coordinator or management departments. I think of those as being the ones that run the day-to-day operations of the city. So it's probably good to protect them a little bit or isolate them from the politics of the day so that there was continuity in the day-to-day operations of the city. But this is the structure that was in place for many, many years and was the system of government that was in place when the ballot question was submitted to voters. For the, I think, I'm sorry, I don't have this exactly, 7th or 8th time was the charm here in the city of Minneapolis. And so that brings us to 2021. Charter Amendment number 184, after adoption, was named 184. It created the executive mayor and legislative council form of government. What did it do? It basically did three things. It established a system of shared power where the functions of government are shared, but they are separated between an executive, the mayor, and a legislative body, the council. This is very familiar to us in terms of the federal and state forms of government. Most of the 50 largest cities in the United States have this form of government. It's popular the larger the community becomes because an elected executive mayor can be held accountable at the ballot box. They have a little bit more authority to articulate a vision, to bring community together than, say, a city manager. And so those are the two most popular form of government in the United States, either a mayor council, strong mayor, or a city council and a manager. The interesting thing between those, of course, if you think about it, in both cases, either a strong mayor or a city manager, they've taken away executive and administrative authority from the council. So in almost all cities in the United States that either operate under a strong mayor or a city manager, council doesn't have executive and administrative authority. And in fact, in the state of Minnesota, if you are a city manager form of government, which is the vast majority, there are statutes in place that say the council is prohibited from directing any officer other than the city manager. And so you might say this is sort of a similar thing, but instead of an appointed manager, you have an elected executive accountable to the voters. So that's the first thing it did. Number two, it eliminated that executive committee that Mayor Fraser was successful at getting. So it said, if you've got a strong mayor, we don't need that executive committee anymore. So it got rid of the executive committee. And then three, it affirmatively said the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city and the head of the city's administration. The city's administration being the term to say all those departments, that's the administration. The mayor is the head of it and the chief executive officer. So very much, of course, like a governor or the president. And that's the three things that the ballot question really did. And it was adopted in November of 2021, and it became effective 30 days later on December 3rd of 2021. You'll also recall that in 2021, that was the last full regular municipal election. So the council that came in at the beginning of 2021 came in with this form of government already in place. And as you pointed out, Ms. Mills, this system of government has now been in place for a little over 2 years. So it feels like it just happened very recently, even last year, but it's been a bit longer than that. And so we're trucking along with this new form of government. Here then is that original org chart that I showed you, right? That had the mayor and the council and those 10 departments in the middle, but it's been slightly revised, as you can see. And now there is a direct line from the mayor to those departments. And there's a dotted line from the council, because the council still does have oversight. They still have budgetary and financial controls over the entire enterprise. They set policies for how the city operates. And of course, they have ordinance making power for the city. Ordinance making power being a way of saying they make local laws together with the mayor. So they do have a touch on those departments. The government structure amendment didn't remove the council. It really focused on saying who gives day-to-day direction to those departments. And that clearly was the mayor in that new form of government. So this was what we had in place starting December 3rd of 2021. This was our new org chart. And I know you understand this, go over it briefly. The system of shared powers, you often hear that in separated systems of powers, the mayor proposes, but the council disposes, right? The mayor proposes new policies in his State of the City address. He proposes the budget. He says, here's the vision I think we should pursue as a city. Here's the things I think are best. Here are some policies, council, I'd like you to consider, much like the governor will do, and much like the president would do in a State of the State or a State of the Union. And it's up to the legislative body to decide. In terms of the administration, that second sphere there that's kind of orange colored, the mayor is the direct supervisor over the administration, but the council has an evaluatory role. They oversee. How are you performing? Are you achieving results for our constituents? We gave you a budget. How are you performing against the goals and budget that we set? And then the third bucket there, of course, is, and I think oftentimes we forget, the mayor is elected to represent all 13 wards. Council members are very well aware. They represent a ward. They speak for those 33,000+ people of their ward. And they are very, very, I'll use the word parochial. They are very much in touch with their constituents, and they take that representation very seriously. The mayor represents the entire city, right? That's a citywide election. And so that's an interesting dynamic where the mayor is the chief elected official as well as the city's chief executive. And I use that CEO model in two ways, executive and elected being a representative and a spokesperson. So this is the model that voters approved. After it was approved, of course, we spent all of 2022 really saying that now we have this new form of government. There's a disconnect in our code, which is like our statutes, and in our charter about who reports to whom and how the organization and the operations of the government will be. And the Charter Commission very, I think, smartly left those decisions to the mayor and the council. They said, we're going to give you a structure, a really high level chart. You, the mayor and council, the elected representative of the public, should figure out how do you want to organize those little boxes of departments within. And so we spent most of 2022, an entire year, thinking about that. The mayor put together an advisory group of local executives from the private sector, from the public sector, academics, and a few charter commissioners and others to advise him on what form might be best. Because this form, where the mayor would directly supervise 10 of our 20 departments, also, by the way, the largest departments that have the biggest impact on the community, the biggest impact on the day-to-day lives of constituents, and the biggest budgets, right? CPED, huge. Public Works, the biggest department. Fire, police, these are big departments. And the mayor said, I don't know that I'm going to have the capacity as the mayor to literally sit and operate those departments on a day-to-day basis. And the advice he got back was, well, you could do like St. Paul and have a deputy mayor. You could appoint a chief operations officer, or you could do a cabinet. And the mayor really liked the idea of a cabinet. So it wasn't, a deputy mayor felt very political, and he didn't like that model. One operations officer felt a little bit too bottlenecky, or the potential for a bottleneck. And so he really liked the idea of a small cabinet to advise him on how to run the executive branch and to be his closest advisors and to take on a lot of the day-to-day supervisory functions. And so he worked with the council over all of 2022 to pursue that model. And that got us to this. This is our current organizational chart. This is codified under Ordinance 2022-45. I put it on that chart for you. It was adopted in October. We started in January of 2022. And by the time we got to October, we finally got the votes to pass this ordinance through the council, and the mayor approved it. If you want to go find out more information in our legislative information management system, I've given you the LIMS file where you can find all of the background reports, the information, the meetings, agendas. But this is the structure it created. And so you can see, instead of the mayor directly supervising those departments, it really put in place this cabinet. So you have the Office of City Attorney, self-explanatory, I think, the Office of Public Service, and the Office of Community Safety. The Office of Public Service, you can see, oversees most of the departments. That big block in blue that's directly under it. We created 3 new departments out of the 20, so we're up to 25 now. And most of those departments are part of the Office of Public Service, which is headed by a position known as the city's operations officer. It kind of took the place of the city coordinator and ratcheted up a bunch. The mayor also felt convinced that there was a good reason to separate out what I'll call our community safety departments. Those 5 that are shown under the community safety commissioner, part of the Office of Community Safety, so that they could function together. They could be more integrated. They could have a single line of command under this new position of the Commissioner of Community Safety. And so those 3 positions are the mayor's cabinet. However, we didn't go back and change the charter yet. It's one of the issues that is on our to-do list. And so that means even though the ordinance put in place this cabinet structure that the mayor thinks would be better long-term for the city's internal operations, there are a total of 10 departments that the mayor still appoints subject to council confirmation. And for convenience, I've highlighted those for us here in yellow. So in addition to the city attorney, the city operations officer, who is the head or the executive officer of the Office of Public Service, and the community safety commissioner, who's the executive in charge of the Office of Community Safety, those departments in the yellow highlighting are the departments, we call them the charter departments, appointed by the mayor with the consent of the council. That continues to this day because that part of the charter wasn't changed. And we can't change through ordinance what's in the charter. So this piece is still on the table. Just to briefly sort of highlight all of that in one slide to show you, the mayor has these 3 direct reports. The city operations officer, Margaret Anderson Kelleher, former Speaker of the House. She serves as the primary policy and operational advisor to the mayor. 17 of our 25 departments report to her or through a deputy who reports directly to her. And she is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the city. She also has direct responsibility and control over our management functions. So that's budget and finance, human resources and personnel, our facilities and property owned by the city, and our information technology systems. Those things that make the city run on a day-to-day basis are all part of the Office of Public Service under the city operations officer. We also have an Office of Community Safety. Those are the 5 community safety departments: police, fire, emergency management, 911 or emergency communications, and the new department, neighborhood safety. This is under a community safety commissioner, former chief judge of the Hennepin County District Court, Todrick Barnett, recently sworn in as our commissioner. He serves then as the primary advisor on all things related to community safety policies and operations, and has direct responsibility for those 5 departments that are part of his office. And then the third person who's part of the cabinet, the executive officer, of course, our city attorney, who is not only the attorney for the city, but the chief legal advisor and counselor under the charter for the entire city enterprise. That includes the mayor, the council and all council members, all of our departments, and all of our boards and commissions, except for the charter, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. So she heads the Office of City Attorney, which is our in-house legal department. And then, of course, I should point out the mayor's chief of staff, who's not necessarily an executive officer and isn't confirmed by council, Michael Vlakovich, the chief of staff to the mayor, who runs the mayor's personal office and the mayor's staff. That was a very, very high-level review of where we are today. I know that former council member Goodman is also on the call and can answer questions. I think the big part of this was to get through this so we could take your questions. You're very plugged into the community and you know way more than I've already talked about. So I will be quiet and try and address any questions that you have for me.
Okay, as we had said prior, we can take some questions in the chat, and I see that there are at least a few in here, but also if you'd like to raise your hand, you can ask questions. Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to say a couple of words first or just take questions as they come.
Lisa, just a minute. Mr.
Okay.
Carl, Can you take down your screen?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. A lot of you are my neighbors, and I'm grateful to see you, even though it's only on Zoom. I wanted to mainly thank Casey Carl for being here today. I want to give you an idea of what his schedule was like today. Thursdays are now city council meetings, and so as much as no one wants Casey to give them advice, everyone wants Casey to give them advice on the morning of the council meeting. And so my guess is he was in the office about 7 in the morning. The council meeting preparation started probably about 9. The council meeting went until 2:30 today. If you watched it on TV, part of it the day I did. It was very contentious and long. And then there was a closed council meeting after that, ending around 5:15. So Casey has had an extremely stressful day, and I think the reason that he's here is out of his respect for the League of Women Voters and his partnership with the League on elections, which is also a division that is under him. So I want to just reiterate how lucky we are to have Casey and how much we appreciate that he took this hour away from his family, and he's probably exhausted. He also probably will not say anything political or as direct as I might. And so maybe direct questions that are more direct towards me, because I don't want to put him in a position where he has to say something that could get him fired, which I pretty much worry about on a daily basis, even though I'm not there. And I'm happy to try to answer questions, or I'll also defer to Casey if that's okay. I also have a friend here cooking in my kitchen, and my dog is looking on intensely. So you might hear some background noise, and that is all good. Do you want to wave? Get it? Come over and wave. Say hello. This is my friend who's a postdoctoral postdoc in physics, who's here for a physics conference, and he's from Nepal.
Sweet.
Thank you. Okay, let's see what questions you might want me to answer.
So I think Jane
Or
Lance
Casey.
is the first question, or
Yep.
Jane, you
Well,
want to?
well, Lisa asked when the police were taken out of the sort of the group that was reported to the executive committee and reported to directly to the mayor. So I think that's a really good question. And then my question was, you know, around those organizational changes about creating the community, the Department of Public Safety, and that whole organizational structure, what was the role of the city council? Was there an ordinance that was created? Because I know that the city council's role is around creating ordinances, or were they just sort of an approval of an organizational change? And when organizational changes are made, how are those done? And what is the function or role of the city council around those things? And because I was never really sure about, does that take an ordinance to do that? Or is it just an approval of of saying, hey, I want to do this. Yes, we approve.
I think those are Casey questions.
Okay.
I'll start, and Lisa, I think what would be helpful is for you to explain your experience as we did, because, you know, we did a year worth of briefings with council members to get their buy-in. I'm going to start with the question I think I heard about the police department. Minneapolis is very unique in this way, and that is that from the very beginning, before we even have a charter, the mayor was named the exclusive supervisor of the police department. That has been from the beginning. Before the government structure changed, and I would do presentations like this and explain the sort of unique role that the mayor has, I used to say you have to think of the mayor as wearing 2 hats. And I think this is still true today. The mayor is the mayor, and the mayor is what you might call the commissioner of police, right? In New York, they have a police commissioner. The mayor in Minneapolis has always worn those 2 hats at one time. So the mayor is the mayor, but the mayor is in charge of the police department. And our charter, so before the charter, he had that role, or the mayor had that role. And since then, it's been strengthened. And that is that it says the mayor has absolute power over the police department. And that's really one of the only 2 places that talks about the mayor. Oh, I didn't say absolute, it says exclusive is the word. It uses the term exclusive power with respect to the mayor in 2 places in the charter, and one of them is over the police department. So it was never taken out from under the executive committee. It's always been under the mayor. The only power the executive committee had was to approve the mayor's nomination of the police chief.
As it pertains to the city, yeah. As it pertains to the city council involvement, we were invited, asked, cajoled, and begged to come to briefings at multiple intervals with regard to the work that's happened. So we were not asked to participate in the work group that set up the various ideas, but we were asked to be briefed multiple times, and we were invited, I can think of at least 5 times when I was asked to come. And at that point, we were able to provide feedback. Initially, I had concerns about how the police would work, how the police chief would work, and I wasn't sure what I thought of it, and I expressed my concern, but I was actually convinced by the mayor himself that the structure that we put into place made the most sense. I guess, you know, I mean, I'm not in office, so everything is my own editorial comment. To be fair, I only speak for myself. Whether or not council members availed themselves of the opportunity to be briefed and provide feedback is a different story. I availed myself of that. Others did not, or spent the time complaining about the work of the group that was happening.
The other thing I would say to the question about what role the council has. So in addition to the briefings, the charter says that it is the council by ordinance that creates departments. So the charter defines certain departments, but it says the council by ordinance has to create the department, name who is in charge of that department, describe the powers and functions and duties of the, so that's what that omnibus ordinance that I said we spent all of 2020. I mean, we had to create 25 departments in one ordinance and define each one of them. Its name, who was the head of it, what was their title, what were their duties, who did they report to, how were they appointed, what were the functions of that. I mean, it took a long time. And during those briefings, there was the negotiation between the mayor and his team and the council members about, will you support that? Would you not support that? And from those negotiations came the idea, for example, that what was previously a division of race equity should be lifted up to the level of a department. Was the idea that instead of an office of performance and innovation, which was a small group of people, that should be elevated up to a department. Those are really council decisions. And it reflects their participation in that year-long process, and ultimately why they had to do an ordinance to create that org chart, that organizational chart.
Thank you.
The question that's here is, how has this changed how has this change impacted council members' ability to address constituent concerns and complaints?
So this might be an area where Casey and I do not agree, and it's probably mainly because of the way that I did constituent services compared to many others. And so I had a very, very hands-on approach. If Dot Lilja's garbage wasn't picked up, she reached out to me. I called the person in solid waste and recycling, and then her garbage would get picked up. That's the way I did the job. But new council members don't know how to do that. And I think the enterprise captured on the fact that everyone didn't know how to do it or couldn't do it fairly. And so they created a system where you would call 311, everything would be listed out. Dot would be number 73 in the missed garbage, and they'd get to 45 in the first day and, you know, 72 in the second day, and she'd be on the third day. I do think it is less personal. There's less personal intervention in solving day-to-day problems. And the 311 division was set up in order to try to manage that, but it took time for that to work. And so I think the kinks are being worked out. Clearly, Councilmember Cashman would not know who to call in solid waste and recycling. So in some ways, it might be more fair that you would call 311 and get in line, but it's not as personal as someone like me would choose to be. And the clerk's office created a whole new constituent management system to coordinate with 311 to try to operationalize it. But I'm just, you know, an old goat, and I like the idea of getting people's concerns and making sure they're dealt with myself and following up. And those days are kind of gone. Everything is pretty much computerized, and it works into a system, and there's a level of follow-up that is not as personal. But to be honest, I don't think that most of the council members care that much about solving constituent problems. They don't see that as their role anymore. They see their role as watching out for what the mayor is doing and criticizing it, and telling department heads on a daily basis what they should be doing. And instead of calling it a staff direction, it's now called a legislative directive. So it's the exact same thing as the council members did before. They just call it something different. And I do want to say, especially to my neighbors and members of the league, government and politics has become really nasty. And that extends into simple things like, how is your garbage going to be picked up? And we are in an era where people are just simply not respectful of each other anymore. And so instead of having this function of like kind of proposing ordinances and disposing of ordinances, now the city council just proposes whatever it wants and it challenges the mayor to veto it or not. And so I'm not sure that, you know, every action has a reaction, and the reaction of the way the system has worked is to have this kind of city council oversight system where every time any employee in the mayor's system, which is all employees, do something wrong, the council members like yell at them. That's their oversight function now. And so I think that is troubling, and I don't think that changes through structure change. It changes through the public saying it's unacceptable to treat people that way. And since most of the public doesn't see how that happens on a daily basis, it might not be something that changes as long as we live in the world of Trump's type politics that are both equally as divisive on the right as they are on the left.
Thank you, Lisa. Margaret?
I'd like to know about these charter department heads, and is that where the real struggle will be going forward in terms of whether or not the city council gets to approve those 10 charter department heads, and what needs to happen to be put into the charter based on what you just outlined, Mr. Carl?
I think that I think that will be a challenge for the city as we adapt, right? Remember, we lived for over 160 some years with a very diffused, strange government structure, and we've only been very recently under this new structure. So I think, and Councilmember Goodman was just saying, systems only do so much. It's people within the systems, and people have to get used to the new system. They have to operate in the new system. And I think it's a matter of, Council Vice President Shugtai said this in a meeting that I was in the other day. She goes, it's been a lot of change. It's a lot of change for council. It's a lot of change for our constituents. And we just kind of need to live with it for a while. And I think there's some truth to it. There's a live with it for a while. And that a push for more change, especially more significant change, probably that's too much change for any system to handle at once. So I do think there's probably a cooling period, and then maybe there's times for change. And that will have to be worked out between the people, right? The people who hold the offices that are mayor and council. We are all people still. And to remember and give each other grace and treat each other with, some civility, that has to happen so that the organization can do further changes that may be necessary in the future. So I do think that the issue of those charter department heads is critical. I think the council sees that as an important oversight function, that those 10 departments are the biggest departments. Those are the departments that touch your lives as constituents and residents the most. They are the ones that impact your day-to-day the most. And so I think the council feels that losing that direct connection is a loss to the council as a governing body, is a loss to their constituents, is a loss to their wards. And I think that we have to be sensitive to that perception, whether that's from a council member or the public at large or constituents, and say, we have to get through that change together. That's a long-winded way of saying, I think probably changes are coming in the future, but probably they need to be paced. They need to be thoughtful, and we can't just keep piling more change on top of a system that has changed, honestly, radically, just in the last 2 years. And then before I give it back to Lisa, I want to say, Lisa, you sell yourself short. I've been a clerk for 25 years, and none of the elected officials, both at the county and city level that I've worked with, and I counted it the other day, it's like 40 some that I've worked with, none of them cared about constituent services the way you did. and that your constituencies were very, very lucky to have you. And it is our goal. You mentioned the constituent services team, so I have to put a plug in for my staff because I love my staff. It is our goal to try and institutionalize a bit of what Lisa Goodman brought to that role in terms of constituent services, so that every constituent, regardless of which ward they're in, regardless of who the council member is, there's a level of consistent service in the council office that we're trying to institutionalize based on our longest serving council member's service to her constituents, and that's Lisa Goodman. So.
Well, thanks, Casey. I want to address Margaret's question about the department heads. If I were on the council, I would not like the idea of not having the ability to approve or deny a charter department head. I have voted against appointments made by the mayor. To be fair, the director of the health department, I voted against, and that was Mayor Fry's appointee. So it happens, and you usually have good reasons for that. The push, I do agree with Casey and what Councilmember Chuktai said, actually, that this is a lot of change and everyone is having a hard time essentially dealing with it. And so maybe bringing forward a lot more change in another election doesn't make sense. Unless you're Robin Wansley and you want to have like initiative and referendum on the ballot, then that's the kind of change apparently that's okay. So you can say on one hand, you don't want a lot of change, but your allies bring up a change that's even bigger. I would say maybe a part-time city council should go onto the ballot. Let's have that change. That might make a difference too. Ultimately, this is about everyone doesn't want change that affects them, right? So if I was a council member, I'd want to have a say in the department heads, but that needs to be balanced very carefully against getting good people to do the job. We lost Heather Johnston, who is a highly qualified public person who went on going, she ended up working at Winthrop and Weinstein, right? So she's managing a large law firm now and probably being paid twice as much. We lost someone good and more than just her because of the way that the process works. And I would put that too in the bucket of when you have people on both sides who have no problem tearing apart people in public and bringing in members of the public, spinning a story to them and then having them repeat it about why this person is terrible. No one wants to go through that. And so I do think a cooling off period of making changes probably makes sense, but I think that goes for both sides. And unfortunately, we are in an environment in our political discourse these days where there are both sides within the parties. It's not the right versus the left. It's the very right versus the right, the very left versus the left. And most of us are somewhere very deeply in the middle of all of that.
Thanks, Lisa. Deborah Jenner, do you want to ask your question or you want me to read it?
Why don't you go ahead and read it?
Okay, leading up to the vote about changing the charter, we were told that the departments felt they were trying to please 14 bosses. Is there any sense that this has made their jobs any better?
No. Casey can say something different, but no, it's not. The spaghetti chart is gone, so that's good. We understand who's accountable to who, but as I explained earlier, Deb, they used to say, we're going to give a staff direction. Staff's going to do this, and the staff's going to do that, and the staff's going to do this, with no regard for any extensive work plan that the staff already had or the timeline they were on. And the charter change said, you can't do that anymore. You can't tell staff what to do. You have to go through the administration, and the administration will balance that against all of the other things that they need to do. So the new thing is to have a legislative directive. So using the legislative power of the council to demand the administration do something. So they wouldn't go directly to Margaret Kelleher and tell her, you have to do this HR thing. They would just simply pass a legislative directive under their legislative authority to tell the mayor to tell Margaret to do something. And so it's the same level of stress. And in fact, if you take a look at any city council agenda, you'll see many legislative directives. They come up in committees. They are walked on to meetings that aren't published in advance. Were there any today, Casey? I don't remember. There were some today, right? Even with the meeting over all the other issues, there were still 12 more things council members were busy telling the mayor to tell his department heads what to do. So it's slightly better they don't call them and threaten them directly. I've been in that position too, to be fair. I have called department heads and told them to do things in the past. So I'm not innocent to that. it's the volume of it. And so how does anyone do their job when they're being told to do 6 different things every 2 weeks?
Okay, thanks. Glenna, you have a question?
Yeah, this is a follow-on from the question and the discussion we just had. I thought the new structure was supposed to insulate staff from the council. So why are they able to directly criticize somebody in public? That just seems bizarre to me. And who would work for them?
So I guess I'll give you an example. I usually talk in examples, and this will be one everyone will probably remember. The city council via the charter said the city is going to investigate rent control. And so the housing division of CPED was asked to do a study on rent control. So they brought forward 26 different people. They spent like 6 months or more kind of coming up with an opinion about rent control. And when they got up to present the opinion about rent control, Andrea Brennan was told, "You don't know what you're talking about. You're wrong. Your information is wrong. You're biased. You're just doing what the mayor wants." All of that stuff was said to this very highly professional woman in public in a committee meeting. So there is this feeling that now all 4,000 staff people are an extension of the mayor. And if you don't like the mayor, the staff are only doing what the mayor likes. And so it's actually put a target on even more staff's back, because what ends up happening is if you're someone in the administration, which is everybody, and the council members don't like the mayor and his opinion on something, you blame the staff saying that they're just doing what the mayor wants. If the decision is disagreeable to you. If the decision is agreeable to you, then you just don't do anything, right? Then, well, they agree with us, the mayor agrees, we'll move forward. Casey, can you give a better example than them? And there's probably 20 better examples, but.
No, I think that's a good example.
And Andrea Brennan quit, and now she's the head of the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, where she is paid 3 times as much and probably works as much and manages a whole bunch of people and a CDFI building affordable housing around the state.
Okay,
This is kind of shocking. I can't think of anywhere where you would attack, like in a business or something, where you would attack a staff rather than taking something up with their supervisor.
These are the top people. I mean, these are the top staff people. These are department heads like the CPED director. I mean, imagine the conversation about unsheltered homelessness. I mean, we have people who work in that area who are low-level people who the advocates are going to their homes and attacking them in public. And I mean, things are just so incredibly heightened because so many council members are acting as the advocates themselves.
there was a question earlier, and then Colleen, we'll go to you next. But there was a question about the training of the city council. Or do they come in and they just operate out of thin air? I mean, do they get direct training?
We do, I mean, in my opinion, so I started in 2010, and one of the first questions I asked is who does orientation for council members? Because in my previous iteration as a county clerk, I helped to orient and train the county commissioners when they were elected. And there was kind of we kind of throw things together, and I said, ooh, that needs to have a lot of intentionality and a lot of thought. And so I started working on it right away in 2010. And in 2013, we had the first election since I got here for city council. And so in the transition between 13 and 14, we did our first orientation that I put together. And that was, a 2-week-long process before you're sworn in. We went through the nuts and bolts, how you get paid, where you park, how you hire your aides, what is the function of city government, the real high level theoretical. What is city government? What is a council? What is your role as a council member? What are your major responsibilities? How do you relate to this thing called the administration? Down to how do you make motions? How do you find your agenda? When do committees meet? And we've done that very intensive training after each of the transitions. In fact, they've gotten longer, not shorter. We take feedback from all the new council members and we say, what worked, what didn't, what would you like us to see done differently? And so I personally, Councilor Goodman was here before me, so I didn't have the luxury of being able to give her an orientation, but I feel like we've done a very good job at providing orientation and onboarding for them. not just initially, but then throughout the year through study sessions and things like that. So I do feel like we've done a good job at trying to provide that type of education, always open to making it better, of course. And I don't know what was offered before I came. Lisa could tell us.
There were 4 new people when I first started, and we had about 2 weeks of orientation, and we visited all the various job sites. We learned about all the various departments. Remember, I had never even been to City Hall before I was elected. And I think there's a lot of council members who are actually like that. And there are many on this council who take it very seriously. Many of the, I would say newer, meaning the past 2 years, not Katie and Erin, but and participated. I also joined into the emergency preparedness training for the new council members, and they were, almost all of them were there and engaged. I think that if the politics got out of the way of running a $2 billion corporation, there are many committed people on the city council who are passionate and representing their constituents who could get the job done. It's just that we're in such a fraught environment where being mean and saying mean things has become acceptable by a former president and is clearly acceptable within the country now. And that leaks out, given frustration or not, from both sides, right? I mean, like, I've done it. I don't want to say I'm innocent, but this government structure has created kind of a different situation where everyone piles on the mayor because he supposedly has all the power now, rather than this idea that they work together.
Okay, so Colleen, you want to go next, and then Pamela, I believe.
Well, I just wanted, this is really more of a personal observation, but it seemed that the Office of Public Safety was poorly understood by most people, the difference between the chief of police and the role that the public safety office maintained. Was that just a measure of personalities? Or if it was a measure of personalities, and it seems to be more easily understood now, how do you solidify that moving forward? Because I mean, it seemed that there was 2 flamboyant people in 2 positions that were engrossed in kind of, bothering each other, and who was closer to the mayor. That's just my observation. But, how do you straighten that out forever?
Yes, next question. I'm sorry, what was that?
Yes, I would say yes. And that Judge Todd Barnett is a perfect fit for that position.
Okay, good.
Okay, Glenna. Oh, I'm sorry, Pamela. Excuse me.
Yeah, thank you. Some of the things that you've, mentioned here have been widely reported in the papers and things, and some of the behaviors and things have been appalling. But what I'm wondering is if we had, let's say, more mature, reasonable personalities on some of these seats, would this structure work better? Is it because of these personalities that it's become, there's the issues that you're bringing up or would it work pretty well if it was what we would consider a more rational bunch of people, more mature behaviors?
Do you want me to try to answer that,
Yeah.
Casey?
I mean, I'll take a stab, and certainly welcome your comments as well, Lisa. I think I would characterize it this way. I'm not sure it's about maturity level. I think people, and I think, Lisa, you captured this very well. Politics at all levels has become a blood sport, right? At every level, even local. And so there's this sort of the pendulum swinging. It has swung this way to a really tough, competitive arena where it's, scorched earth politics. We need to have it move back this way where it's about, we can disagree but still be civil, right? At the end of the day, we're people and we all care passionately about the community. It's how to say, how do people fit within a structure and care passionately and bring that passion to the table, but not in a way that is harmful. And I don't have an answer to that, unfortunately. I think we all have to find the answer to that, but But I think we see that at the federal level, state level, local level. None of us are immune to it. I think you said this, Lisa, and I concur. I have a very privileged seat. I want to be very clear on that. I'm very, very close to the council. I mean, I'm officed amongst them. I see them at their best, that their constituents don't even see some of the things they do that I see, the sacrifices, the things they don't agree with, but it's right to do, and they'll do it no matter what the cost. And I see them at their worst. And so I'm very careful to say it's not that they are immature. It's sometimes that passion just overwhelms. And when that passion overwhelms, I can't see you as a person who equally cares about the community. I see you as my enemy. And in today's politics, it's my enemy must be destroyed and destroyed utterly. And that's just, I mean, it's strange for you to probably hear me say that about city government, but it's here. I mean, it just is. And it's not just Minneapolis, it's other cities too. I have colleagues all around the nation, and they report the same thing, that politics has become crass and coarse and mean. And it takes all of us holding our elected officials accountable to say, we don't accept that. Want your passion, want your commitment, want your best, want you to be your best. And that's the piece I think that's coming.
I agree with you, Casey, completely, and I don't think it's an immaturity thing. When I left public office, I had an excellent working relationship and a very good personal relationship with almost every city council member, those I agreed with and those I did not agree with. And many that find themselves in different places also have good personal and professional relationships with each other. Once a camera is turned on, and there's a lot of advocates in the room, even things that you might not believe in become more important and become more performative than is healthy for an organization like the city. I am a very strong believer in the government structure change. I do think that things are better. I mean, I guess the simple question is it better than it was before? And there are growing pains, but without question, it's better. What would be better is if 13 people plus the mayor understood that only 13 people knew what it was like to do that job at the same time, and everyone gave each other grace to do it. And that everyone came to it from a point of view of doing best for the public, rather than saying, I am the public and everyone agrees with me. And then the next person says, I am the public and everyone agrees with me. Because when 36% of the people vote in an election, you don't have a mandate from anyone. You have a mandate from those that feel the most strongly to show up at that moment. That's why I think it might be better to have city council elections in the even years when the turnout is extremely high. That might be a way to get a more representative group. It might not. I never loved that idea when I was in office because I felt like we'd be at the very bottom of the ballot and no one would pay attention to us at all. But I wonder if having a much higher turnout would be better, because then there would be an actual mandate.
One more question. I think we're going to have to wrap it up. How has the newly expanded office of the auditor been operating? Casey, I think you.
Yeah, so the auditor is part of the legislative branch with me. So the auditor and the clerk are the two odd ducks. All the other departments are under the administration with the mayor, and then there's the clerk and the auditor with the council. Ryan Patrick is our first city auditor. He was the internal auditor before that. And in addition to the traditional, financial and programmatic auditing that they're doing, they've added two new divisions. One for policy and research to help council and council committees to understand and to research and to analyze policy proposals, both those from the administration and the mayor, as well as those by council members. And then a new division called oversight and evaluation, which is, I think, primarily looking at that back end. So if policy and research is the front end going into a policy, oversight and evaluation is intended to be the back end. We gave you a budget, we set a target, we told you we wanted these outcomes or results. Did you achieve them? Did you overspend your budget? Why? Do we need to give you more money? Do you need more resources? Was that too big of a stretch goal? So between those two functions, that's intended to kind of wrap its arms around the council and provide very professional, nonpartisan support for the body. And I think that it's growing pains, right? We haven't even hired the two directors of those divisions yet. In fact, they just today at the council meeting approved those job classifications. So we are in the process of getting ready to hire a director for policy and research and a director for oversight and evaluation. And, it takes longer than we like always in government, but I think the future vision of that, if that makes sense, sort of the forward proactive looking research and analysis, and then the aftermath of, did you achieve those goals? How effective were you? Did you get the value for the money that we invested in the form of an appropriated budget? I actually am excited because I think that gives the council a lot more meat to chew on, which is that legislative role. And I think that starts to occupy some space and give them a sense of, aha, we're serving our constituents, we're analyzing policies, we're evaluating performance. Our role is complete. And I think, this is my personal opinion, in the absence of those functions, that's where the council feels a little like, what are we doing? And we're here to do stuff. And I think that once those things get up and running, that'll give a little bit more focus and a little bit more structure to help the council ease into its role. So when I said at the beginning, we kind of need to let the system live a little bit, that gives it the space for that auditor's office to develop and to develop the tools and resources to better help the council ease into its role as a legislative and policymaking body.
Well said. I would have called it a shadow government, so I'll keep quiet. I think Casey had a very fair analysis being on the inside, and I appreciate it because I do think it could be viewed as that way, and we want to be hopeful about how that would work. And I agree with you that that is a very hopeful analysis of it. You're muted.
So I'm talking
Thanks,
to myself
Lisa.
here. Thank you. Well, Lisa, take it over.
There we go. So our time is up. And there's another big event that I think a lot of us are anxious to get to. So I want to just say thank you to our amazing speaker, City Clerk and Clerk of the Council, Casey Carl, and former City Council member Lisa Goodman. And thank you all for a really great discussion. We hope we've met our goal for the buzz, which is that everyone leaves the discussion with a broader understanding of the issues. A recording of tonight's program will be available on our Civic Buzz website, and we will have the slides from Mr. Carl's presentation available in a few days as well. You can also find other ways to join the League's work on our website. And just a plug for next month's Civic Buzz, we will have our new Public Safety Commissioner, Todd Barnett, along with our new Neighborhood Safety Director, Luana Nelson-Brown. And we will be in person at the Plymouth Congregational Church. That'll be Tuesday, April 4th. So thank you all.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lisa.
Lisa.
You're the
Thank
best.
you.
Thanks,
Good
Lisa.
job.
Thank you.